Now that we have discussed the Constitutional Convention, let's take a moment to look at the Constitution that is going to replace the Articles of Confederation. Keep in mind, none of the buildings that you're going to see in these pictures have been built yet at the time of the Constitutional Convention. But this building has come to represent the legislative branch. That is the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where our legislature meets. So this new Constitution is divided into three branches, the first one being the legislative branch, and its official duty is to make or change laws. That's easy enough to remember. L for legislative, L for laws. Its powers include the power to declare war, the power to impeach government officials, and impeachment, there is a very common misconception about how impeachment works and what it is. When a lot of people hear impeachment, they think that means you are removed from office. That's not entirely true. Whenever the president or whoever is impeached, all this means is that the House of Representatives has basically charged you with a crime and has recommended that you be removed from office. Once that happens, then you go to the Senate and there is a trial in the Senate. And if the Senate finds you guilty, then you are thrown out of office. If the Senate finds you not guilty, then you remain in office. So far, we've had 3 presidents that have been impeached. None of them have been convicted, and they have been able to remain in office. Our legislative branch consists of a bicameral legislature. This means it is divided into 2 houses. One is the House of Representatives. It is based on population. So the larger the population of a state, the more members that state gets in the House of Representatives. For example, California has the largest population of all 50 states, and it receives 53 representatives in the House of Representatives. On the other hand, Rhode Island has 2 members in the House because it has such a small population. If you look at this picture, when you think of the Capitol building, everyone always thinks of the dome, but look at the 2 large sections of the building on each side. One of those is where the House of Representatives meets, the other is where the Senate meets. The next branch is going to be the executive branch. We all know what building this is. What some people don't know is that the White House is sometimes referred to as the Executive Mansion, because this is where the president, who is sometimes called the chief executive, lives. The official duties of the executive branch is to enforce the laws. That, once again, is fairly easy to remember. E for executive, E for enforce. The executive branch is led by the president, and his official jobs include signing laws. So laws are created by the legislative branch, but before they can officially take effect, they have to be signed by the president. Now, if the president disagrees with a law, then he can veto that law, which basically means he sends it back to the legislative branch. They can try to pass it over his veto, which is very difficult to do, or they can make changes to it and send it back to him and see if he will sign it on the second go-around. The president is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Now, this does surprise some people, that the president is the commander-in-chief, but the legislative branch has the power to declare war. Well, that's an example of checks and balances and separation of powers. So, because the government is divided into 3 branches, no one person is able to control the entire government. Instead, you can only control the creation of laws or the enforcement of laws, and so on and so forth. Something else that's important to remember, the president is not elected directly by the people. He is chosen by the Electoral College. This is just a group of people that are chosen to elect the president. Now, how the Electoral College originally worked was the electors were usually elected either by the people or they were elected by state legislatures. And the purpose of the Electoral College is the fact that most ordinary Americans knew nothing about people who were running for president. If you were a farmer in South Carolina, you probably knew nothing about somebody from Massachusetts who was running for president. So instead, you would elect the presidential electors, and you would choose people who you trusted to elect the president. It works a little differently in today's time. Now, each state has a certain number of electoral votes. It's based on population. It's the number of representatives that that state has in the House, plus its 2 senators. So Texas, because it has 36 members in the House of Representatives, gets 38 electoral votes. California, since it has 53 members of the House of Representatives, gets 55 electoral votes, and so on and so forth. And whoever receives more votes in that state receives all of its electoral votes. So if Donald Trump were to receive more than 50% of the votes in Texas, he would receive all 38 of Texas's electoral votes, while Joe Biden, who we all know is going to receive at least 50% of the votes in California, would receive all 55 of California's electoral votes. The last branch is the judicial branch. And the duty of the judicial branch is to interpret the laws. Now, you could also say judge the laws. J for judicial, J for judge. Essentially, this means that the judicial branch decides if a law is constitutional or unconstitutional. It is headed by the Supreme Court. There are now 9 justices that serve on the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court first started, I want to say there were 7, but I'm not positive about that. They are led by the Chief Justice. And justices are chosen by the President and approved by the Senate. Now, just because this Constitution has been written and signed does not mean that it automatically replaces the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution has to be ratified. It has to be approved. Now, the delegates to the Constitutional Convention decide that once 9 states have approved this new Constitution, then it will officially become the new government of the United States. Now, for those who supported this new Constitution, they were known as Federalists. They believed that the United States needed a stronger national government. It needed a government that had the ability to raise taxes and raise an army. On the other hand, there were those who were opposed to this new Constitution. They were known as anti-Federalist. They were usually scared of the idea of a strong national government. They felt that this was setting somebody up to become something similar, if not worse, than King George. So let's talk very quickly about the Federalists, who once again were those who supported this new Constitution and felt that we needed a stronger central government. They included very prominent leaders such as George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Now, these were not men that were very vocal about their beliefs, especially George Washington. Benjamin Franklin could be, but by this point in time, he was 87 and simply couldn't get around and speak as well as he used to. But the fact that men like Washington and Franklin were Federalists really helped out the Federalist cause. The most important Federalists are James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, who got together and wrote a series of essays that were later published in New York newspapers. And these essays are remembered as the Federalist Papers. There were 85 in all. John Jay wrote 5 of them before he got sick and was not able to keep going. James Madison wrote 29, and Hamilton wrote a grand total of 51 of these essays. These essays were meant to help convince Americans that this new Constitution was safe. Even though it created a stronger national government, it divided the power into 3 separate branches, so no one person could control the entire government, and so on and so forth. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, were opposed to a strong national government. They were afraid that this was going to allow someone to become another King George. And many of them were worried that, or they were worried about the fact that this new Constitution did not have a Bill of Rights. They wanted a Bill of Rights that specifically stated what the government could and could not do. The Anti-Federalists included people like Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Samuel Adams. So these are all people who are afraid of a strong national government. Think about Samuel Adams. Think about how hard he fought against King George. He does not, the last thing he wants is another King George. Now, as I said earlier, 9 states were required to officially ratify the Constitution and make it the official government of the United States. Many of the Anti-Federalists, they did agree that they would support this new Constitution if a Bill of Rights was added. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, the author of the Virginia Plan, he promised that if the Constitution was ratified, he would ensure that a Bill of Rights was added. And he was a man of his word. He would stick to this promise. He would make sure that a Bill of Rights was added. And so, by July of 1788, 9 states had ratified the Constitution, and it officially replaced the Articles of Confederation. This took less than a year. The Constitution itself was completed in September of 1787, and the 9th state, which was required to ratify it, did so in July of 1788. The very first state to ratify the Constitution was Delaware, and to this day, it is remembered as the first state. This is a political cartoon that was drawn during this time period, and it shows 9 pillars that are represent the 9 states that had ratified the Constitution, starting with Delaware and going all the way down to New Hampshire, which was the 9th state, the state that officially made the Constitution the new government. Now, since there are 9, that means there are 4 states left that have not ratified. But this cartoonist only included 2, Virginia and New York. Why do you think that he would include these 2, but not the others, not North Carolina or Rhode Island? Well, these are the 2 largest states, and he believes that it's essential that these 2 states jump on board and lend their support, which they do. Very soon after New Hampshire, Virginia and New York do ratify the Constitution. The other 2 are a little slower. North Carolina will be the 12th state to ratify, and Rhode Island will be the very, very last, ratifying the Constitution in 1790, a full year into George Washington's presidency.